What if I told you that Dratini is actually a way more common Pokemon than Venonat? Would you believe me? Well, you better believe me because it's true! And there are tons of other shocking examples just like this throughout the Pokemon franchise. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and here are the rarest Pokemon across the entire series of games. Let's start with that example in the beginning, shall we? Yes, despite being your average, ordinary Gen 1 bug poison type, Venonat is surprisingly one of the least common Pokemon throughout the franchise. It's fairly common throughout the Kanto region and is found in even more areas in the Johto region, but from Hoenn onward, Venonat is an incredibly scarce Pokemon. This Pokemon is not native to Hoenn in any capacity. It appears only as a Pokéradar exclusive in the Sinnoh region, and, well, underground in the remakes after getting the National Pokédex. But that's basically every Pokemon. It isn't found in the Unova region anywhere outside of the Route 3 Hidden Grotto in Black 2 and White 2 only, and even there, it's a measly 4% encounter. And that 4% is the easiest it's been to find since the Johto region. And in Generation 6, 7, and 8, it was even worse, as Venonat cannot be found in the Kalos, Alola, or Galar regions in any capacity. In fact, Paldea is the first new region since Johto to include Venonat in its regional Pokédex. And Scarlet and Violet are also the first game since Black 2 and White 2 in 2012 where Venonat is even catchable. Jeez, you'd think after being missing for an entire decade that it would come back to some sort of fanfare, a regional variant or new evolution perhaps? But nope, not at all. Venonat is now part of an infamous group of the Gen 1 Untouchables, who, despite being from the generation that receives the most fan service and new material, don't remind me Charizard, have gotten nothing new. This infamous group includes 18 families, including some interesting ones like the fossils of Kabuto and Ammonite and the Dratini family. Surprisingly, Psyduck and Golduck, who have been in every single Pokemon game, are also included in this list, which, dang, somehow seems even worse than Venonat and Venomoth being here. But also included in this notorious group are Drowsy and Hypno, who are almost as bad as Venonat and Venomoth when it comes to being forgotten. Even in Kanto, Drowsy only appears on Route 11. And that's not just in Gen 1, that's also in both pairs of remakes too. And this is a route that is completely skippable. While it's slightly more common in Johto, like Venonat, Drowsy would disappear from Game Freak's mind for about 17 years. Between Gold and Silver and its next regional dex appearance in Pokemon Sun and Moon, Drowsy only makes 2 small appearances as a post-game Daily Swarm encounter in Sinnoh, and as a randomly assigned Psychic Friend Safari encounter in Kalos. But like with Venonat, Scarlet and Violet are the games where Drowsy and Hypno shine brightest, as they are more common in Paldea than any other region. Still, only appearing in 4 out of 9 regional dexes as a Gen 1 Pokemon? Pretty rough, dudes. Maybe don't harass the girl in Berry Forest and get yourself put away for 20 years. You know, they say that Gen 5 is the new Gen 1, and in some ways, I can believe that. Their Pokedex was very consciously supposed to be a modern-day recreation of Kanto's Pokedex. And some Pokemon, like the Timber and Roggenrola lines, even look like direct sequels to the Machop and Geodude lines. But obviously, being the biggest generation comes with some downsides, as some Pokemon are doomed to be forgotten. And that's certainly the case for many Gen 5 Pokemon who unfortunately can't fall back on the Gen 1 fan service to save them. These are the Untouchables of the modern day, the Patrat family and the Elemental Monkeys. In total, these guys make up 8 of the 9 Pokemon who've been locked out of every single Switch-era Pokemon game, as the last games any of them were natively obtainable in were Pokemon X and Y, which also sets a franchise record for longest streak without being catchable of 11 years and counting. Venonat may have had a longer drought of not being in a regional dex, but it at least had some post-game catches. No such thing for these guys. Since their introduction, they have been included in 2 of 5 regional dexes, for a measly 40% representation rate. Watchog is a bit of a puzzling one. It doesn't seem like a terribly offensive Pokemon to most people, but it's certainly forgettable since Lillipup seems to be the more memorable Route 1 normal type of that gen. As for the monkeys, the hate against them is pretty well documented. And honestly, I don't despise them. If anything, I just dislike how much deck space they collectively take up. And how every time you fight someone with a Pansage in Unova, you know there are like 2 other trainers with the other 2 monkeys right around the corner. I swear this happens like a dozen times in the Gen 5 games, and it's probably the only thing I hate about them. I was definitely surprised that they didn't make a return in the Indigo Disc DLC with it being in quote-unquote Unova. But hey, Legend ZA could mark their triumphant return just before the Switch 2 hits. We could get the most unmemorable buzzer beater of the century. Speaking of the Kalos region, even with its relatively small roster of new Pokémon, there are a handful who haven't kept up with the crowd. Every Kalos Pokémon has been available in at least 2 games since Gen 6, except these guys who have only appeared once outside of their native region. Spritzee, Swirlix, and Bunnelby, and all of their evolutions obviously, have each only appeared in Pokemon Sword and Shield over the last decade, with Spritzee and Swirlix taking a slight edge over Bunnelby as they continue to be version exclusives even into Generation 8. I guess the world would just cease to be if these two coexisted. Skidoo and Go-Goat both came incredibly close to missing the Switch train entirely, as Pokemon Scarlet and Violet marks their very first appearances since X and Y. And boy did they make their return known to the masses, covering every mountaintop, every grassy field, Champion Gita's team just to make me a little bit angrier, just the whole 9 yards. But somehow, there is a Gen 6 Pokemon who does top these 4 forgotten evolution lines. And that is none other than Pokemon number 9 of the Switchless group, Furfrou. Yes, this is the last Pokemon accompanying Watchog and the monkeys in the group that have never been in a Switch Pokemon game, as Furfrou's last appearance came in the Alola region in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Although, I do like Furfrou's odds considering we are going back to Kalos this year. It does feel kinda weird that they would totally exclude a Pokemon with its own gimmick for so long. Maybe they just didn't feel like making all those extra haircut models for a Pokemon that like 12 people are going to use. Hi, it's me again. Just wanted to say real quick that if you're not subscribed, I would really appreciate if you did. Most of my viewers are not subscribed, and that hurts my feelings a little bit, so can we please fix that? Obviously, Sinnoh Pokemon ain't good on the Switch. I mean, just look at Hippowdon. He's as big as a hippo. But even outside of the remakes and Legends Arceus, I was pretty surprised at just how many Gen 4 Pokemon are represented in every single Switch Pokemon game. Well, not Let's Go, for obvious reasons. With that being said, there are still a few notable exceptions, and one of those is the Burmy line. The Burmy family is among the least common in the franchise since their introduction in Gen 4. While it was impossible to miss these Pokemon in the Sinnoh region, in Unova they were nowhere to be found. In Kalos, Burmy returns, but only as a rare encounter on Route 3 and as a rare Pokemon attacking the Berry Farm. And in the gap between X and Y and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Burmy did not make a single appearance, which means Kalos is the only region it's native to outside of Sinnoh. Oh, pardon me, there is one singular tree in Heart Gold and Soul Silver on Route 38 that you can headbutt to get a Burmy in the postgame. So, there's one tree in Johto. One tree! As for its family members, Wormadam and Mothim, despite these being relatively low-level evolutions, I was shocked to find out that Legends Arceus is the only game in the entire series we can catch them in the wild. Which doesn't count for much. The entire game is centered around catching Pokemon from the Sinnoh region specifically, so if they weren't in the wild, I'd be a little concerned. And on the note of Sinnoh, you know we couldn't make it through this video without mentioning Glameow. Glameow is such a weird case of a Pokemon. At a glance, it appears to be a perfectly normal, well, normal type that should be about as common as any other early game Pokemon, right? But nope, not even close. Glameow is by far one of the rarest Pokemon in the history of the franchise. You know how many versions of Pokemon games have been released since Glameow debuted in Gen 4? 26. You know how many Glameow is in? 5. You know how many regional dexes it's in? 1, not counting Hisui because there's just Sinnoh in the past. In fact, Glameow only appears in the following games: Pearl, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, Shining Pearl, and Legends Arceus. Notice how I didn't even mention Diamond or Platinum there. In Pearl and Shining Pearl, it is a relatively uncommon encounter on only 2 routes in the game. In Oras, it only appears in the post-game exclusive Mirage spots that most players probably overlooked. And even in Legends Arceus, it only appears in 4 of that game's 90 sub-areas. It reminds me of another duo of oddly rare cat Pokemon, Skinny and Delcatty. These Pokemon were only attainable through very obscure ways in Gens 3 and 4. Swarms, in-game trades, and a minuscule 2% encounter rate on Hoenn Route 116. The only times that Skitty has ever been easy to find is at the secret area of Castelia Park, but that's only in Pokemon White 2, and it's a relatively rare spawn on Kalos Route 4. But after the Hoenn remakes came and went, Skitty has been absent from nearly every single Pokemon game. It pretty much only appears in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl's postgame because it has to. But the fact remains, it's been more than a decade since Skitty was last included in a regional Pokedex. We surprisingly haven't discussed any Generation 2 Pokemon yet, and that's because as bad and forgettable as some of them are, Game Freak has actually made a pretty substantial effort to make most of them obtainable in most regions. There really aren't many who have been absent for long stretches of time, though one that did notably jump out at me was Girafarig. Girafarig was pretty notable right from the beginning, as one of the few Johto Pokemon to be completely excluded from Crystal version. This somehow also happened to Ampharos, who is like a top 5 most popular Johto Pokemon. What the heck were they smoking when they made that game? On the other hand, Girafarig wasn't exactly a standout Pokemon, only appearing on one route in the game in Gold and Silver. Even Will and Sabrina completely forget to use one. Ain't that some crap? You got neglected by not one, but 2 Psychic-type users in one game. Oh, and Whitney too. Don't think I forgot about the normal typing. It does barely make it into the Hoenn games as a rare Safari Zone Pokemon, and probably has the most notable appearance in the Sinnoh region where it's found on 2 routes and Elite Four Lucian's team. But after that, Girafarig would go missing for the next 4 consecutive regional Pokedexes. Excluding remakes, it wouldn't make a return during the main story until Paldea, where it finally received a new evolution. So at least Game Freak realized that something needed to be done to this guy. It's pretty similar to Stantler, who is actually worse in many ways. Excluding Hisui, Stantler didn't make a single regional Pokedex appearance between Johto and Palkia. If Weirdeer didn't happen, I bet it would still be missing from the Pokedex. And despite the fact that Hisui and Quillfish can still evolve into Overquill using Barbarage in Scarlet and Violet, Game Freak for some reason took Stantler's ability to evolve into Weirdeer away in Gen 9. Even if it knows Psy-Shield Bash. Make it make sense! Of course, there are still a few more honorable mentions from Generation 5. Heatmor and Durant cannot be forgotten about, even if most people do. Like, for real, remember how Lumineon became memorable because every PokeTuber ranked it as one of the most forgettable Pokemon? I feel like that irony hasn't happened for these guys yet. I think most people just forget them. Well, maybe Heatmor. Durant at least has a funny name. But yeah, these guys have only ever been available in extremely limited quantities since their debuts in Black and White, only appearing in the Kalos and Galar regions since then. That may not sound so bad, but these guys were even displaced in their own region. In Black 2 and White 2 with the renovations to Victory Road, these two aren't available until the post-game. They even had the perfect area with Reversal Mountain to drop them in during the main story, and they just didn't do it. Even though these two are supposed to be a duo, Durant definitely feels like the priority. As it generally gets dropped in way more locations, Heatmor is more or less just along for the ride. And for our last Pokemon of the video, we all know how rare Mythicals are, but I have to say, Meltan and Melmetal certainly take the cake. Being chained to Pokemon Go, the way you get them is both a blessing and a curse. Instead of being available through limited time events like every other mythical Pokemon, Meltan is continuously available through Pokemon Go, but only for 60 minutes after you've transferred a Pokemon from Go to the core series games. So this basically gives you an infinite supply of Meltan and Melmetal, but nothing to really do with them. After Sword and Shield, Game Freak kinda stopped caring about these guys for the last 5 years or so. They may have been transferable to both Let's Go and Sword and Shield, but they had no in-game events in those titles. And with Pokemon Go becoming less popular every year, I wonder how utilized these Pokemon will be compared to every other mythical who keep making sporadic appearances through distributions. Also, God, it sucks that you can't evolve Meltan into anything outside of Pokemon Go. I remember there being fake leaks for the Indigo Disc saying that they would evolve into Duraludon's Metal Alloy, and I was so hyped until it turned out to be fake. What a bummer. But yeah, I guess the moral of the story is, it's better to be a rare, good Pokemon like Dratini, because you'll probably become a fan favorite and Game Freak will actually bring you back in most games. If you're a rare, bad Pokemon, well, then you'll probably just be forgotten, like Stantler and Heatmor. Before I go, I am very behind on my shoutouts, so I just want to thank my newest channel members, Daniel, Stick Your Yacht Out for the Rizzler, and Katrina Overbeck. Thank you guys so much for your support, I really appreciate it. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this one. Be sure to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.